Hey, welcome back to Everyday Economics. This is the podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, CEO of the 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics is a production of America's Talking Network, and you can check out all of our podcasts at americastalking.com. To support Everyday Economics, please make a tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We are recording this episode on Friday, November 15th. And joining me, as always, my friend and colleague, Dr. Orphe Divounguy. He's a PhD economist. Hey, Dr. O, you and I love the headlines. And I'll tell you what, we trade them back and forth like we're dating or something like that. I'll tell you that. One of those headlines that kind of caught my eye and it caught yours because I sent it to you, or you sent it to me and I didn't see it. And then I sent it to you and you're like, hey, I sent that to you. From the Wall Street Journal this week, what to buy if the election has you worrying about inflation. And it poses some interesting thoughts about maybe taking advantage of some investment products that aren't really all that revolutionary. They're pretty basic. And at the same time, we're watching, the Oracle of Omaha, Warren Buffett, moving moving a significant amount of his holdings to cash. So what's the Wall Street Journal story have to say?
Yeah, look, they're basically saying like, look, if you're worried about inflation going up, you could always just buy Treasury inflation protected securities or TIPS, right? What are TIPS? Well, basically they're government issued bonds that adjust their principal value to keep pace with inflation. So, right, inflation goes up, your principal goes up, and so no big deal, right? And so for years, the past couple of years, the real yields on TIPS was basically negative. Now it's above 2%, right? And so that's good. Good news. And definitely a way to think about investing potentially, right? Again, we don't give investment advice on this podcast, but basically a way to protect yourself against inflation. But there are many ways to protect yourself against.
Well, let's talk about let's talk about this product again. I mean, one of the things that we try to do on this podcast is to make things that are either complex or maybe a little bit daunting, understandable, and even maybe to some degree accessible. And again, we're not offering any advice. And I can just tell you right now, I don't have any of this in any of my holdings, and I've never bought TIPS in my life. I've never made this investment. But how might one go about doing this? I mean, can you do this on your own? Do you have to have a broker? Is this something that you could do through like an online trading account? How do you make something like this happen?
Yeah, you could buy TIPS. You could buy TIPS directly, or you could buy into a fund, right? That offers diversification. And basically, instead of holding them directly, I would prefer, at least for my part, and the Wall Street Journal article also talks about that, to basically hold them directly. You're more in control. You know that your investment is going to be, the value of your investment is going to be increasing along with inflation. And so there. So the thing though is that, I think if you're going to get into something like that, you have to know the benefits and perhaps also the drawbacks, right? The benefit, of course, is that you're protected against inflation, very low risk. And we say very low risk because, it's the U.S. government. I think some people might actually start to argue that, well, given the way things are headed, maybe we don't have faith in the U.S. Treasury anymore. And
some
I'm not
people
speaking
might say,
for myself. I'm just speaking for people out there who might be thinking those things.
Sure.
You have to consider the tax treatment, right? You may face taxes each year since there's a inflation adjusted principle, right? So you might face taxes on that principle each year. The returns might be very low right? Compared to other investments. And so, that's another thing to consider. And of course, there's interest rates, right? Interest rates. If interest rates rise significantly, right, the market value of your tips basically are dropping, right? So remember, the relationship between interest rates and the price of bonds is a negative one. So when bond prices increase, yields go down, and when yields go up, bond prices fall, right? So it's usually because people are selling bonds that prices are rising, that yields are rising, and so those are the pros and cons. But yeah, you can directly purchase tips from the U.S. Treasury through treasurydirect.gov. Again, I'm not advertising it. We're not recommending you do that. We're just telling you what this article is about and where to buy those instruments if you were thinking about doing so.
Well, I appreciate your thoughts as always. I mean, it's an interesting way. I mean, if you are a little bit nervous about what's going on in the economy and you're looking
Well,
for
I
something
think,
that would be
look,
ultimately
I think
safe.
before we
Yeah,
go, I think a lot of people are nervous about the first 100 days. The first 100 days of any new administration is
right.
usually one where the president-elect and his party will try to pass as many new things as they can, right? They like to come in making a splash. It's true. It's been true for almost every single president. And so I think a lot of people are worried about some of the proposals they heard during the president's campaign, the new president-elect's campaign, and worried that maybe some of them might be inflationary, right? Might cause inflation to show its rear its ugly head again, and so that's why you're starting to see people talking about inflation coming back and thinking about ways to protect themselves against that resurgence in inflation.
Well, that's an important note. And President Trump's inaugurated on the what is it, the first Monday in January. January, I think it's January 20th. So, I mean, it remains to be seen. But I do appreciate your thoughts on the subject. For Dr. Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics at americastalking.com.